before we introduce Chuck and MAGEE and thank them so much for being with us today, just a couple of quick words about CL&L. Most of you have been with us before, so you're very familiar with the school. I just want to remind everybody we are a nonprofit organization, started at Marymount back in 1994, quite a while ago, have been independent nonprofit since 2010, and we are affiliated again with Marymount. So this is the kickoff, as you know, for our fall semester. If anybody who is new to CL&L can attend the entire week free to try things out. So we hope people will, and I'd like to encourage all of you to invite your friends and introduce them to the school as well. So I'm going to put a note in chat in just a moment. If you have comments or questions, we'll save most of them for the end. We have a lot of wonderful things to hear about from Chuck and MAGEE. And again, we thank them. This session is Inside TV News. It's in honor of Rita Satz, who is with us. I'll rename her from iPad in just a moment. Rita was at NBC for many years as an executive producer. And we thank Rita, we thank everybody. So MAGEE, I'm going to turn it over to you to make more formal introductions. I think everybody knows MAGEE because she is a great friend of CL&L, as she is an intrepid reporter who famously went undercover as a hooker, but she has now advanced in the world to being a grandma. Okay.
Thank you very much, Judy. The hooker years were way in the past when I started out in Providence, Rhode Island. That's another story.
But such a good story.
Today, I have the honor. I mean, when you think Anchorman, you think of Chuck Scarborough, at least I do. He, in my mind, wrote the book on how to anchor, how to be unflappable, how to be in control with the beautiful deep voice, the big brain in his head, and knows how to cover every type of story. But let me give you a little background to the one or two people who could be listening who don't know who Chuck Scarborough is. Charles Bishop Scarborough II has been an anchor at NBC4 since 1974. So that makes him 48 years anchoring in New York City, the longest serving anchor in New York television history, coming up on 50 years in 2024. They're going to be shooting off fireworks in the city. It's going to be a big celebration. A little background on Chuck. He's a native of Pittsburgh and a graduate of the University of Southern Mississippi, Phi Kappa Phi, summa cum laude. You know, and the older I get, the more I see how hard you work in the early years. It really lays the groundwork for the rest of your life. So there he is, summa cum laude. Then he served in the United States Air Force. He currently has a commercial pilot license. He's written 3 novels in his spare time and spends a lot of time giving back to the community, spending time making speeches. He was always so kind to my father, who was running a couple of nonprofits. And I would say, Chuck, could you MC this event? And he said, yes. I mean, he just always the consummate gentleman who cares about the community and is always giving back. Just, you know, I'm in awe of all that he has done. He started his career in Biloxi, Mississippi, then Hattiesburg, then Atlanta, and then Boston. And I believe, Chuck, you can correct me if I'm wrong, you took the number 3 station in Boston and it zoomed to number 1. And that's when the people in New York City thought, we better get this guy down here. We want him here. So I call it a meteoric rise. It was 8 years, but you were also going to school at the time you were beginning your career. And you graduate summa cum laude. So how do you do all that? 36 Emmys, married with 2 children and 2 grandchildren. His TV wife of so many years, Sue Simmons, he partnered with from 1980 to 2012. We'll talk more about the beloved Sue and their different personalities, Chuck and Sue. So much to talk about. But first, just welcome to you, Chuck. I'm so happy you're here. We all worked with Rita Satz, who's here with us too. And this is in honor of Rita that you're here. And congratulations, 48 years. What is the secret to your longevity?
Well, I have no idea. If I had that, I could bottle that and sell it, MAGEE. But thank you it's such an honor to be here with you, and especially with Rita. I have adored her for a long, long time. And she is just one of the most remarkable women you'll ever meet. It's great to be here with her. Just let me make one little observation. The introduction you were given, MAGEE, today, the hooker thing, that was the best introduction I have heard since the time Brian Williams was doing a promo in our newscast for NBC Nightly News, and he said, "That's what's coming up on NBC Nightly News. Now back to Suck and Chew." It was Sue Simmons back then, but
right.
So I don't know.
Right.
I don't want to set a terrible tone for the next hour here, but the secret of my success is a difficult thing to quantify. I think you touched probably on the key, which is the foundation. That is the beginning, the hard work it takes to do anything, to really knuckle down and not worry about so much about your private life and focus almost entirely on your profession, and which means working long hours, which means working weekends. And as you know, television news doesn't conform to any particular schedule. The broadcasts do, but the news events do not. So in the beginning of any reporter's career, you have to be ready to work at any time, any day. And I think if you're willing to work hard and build credibility by being honest and objective and build the trust of your audience, then you have a pretty good shot of continuing on.
You also have to have a lot of talent. I mean, you have to have facility with words. You have to be a writer. You know, journalism. You have to have a very curious mind. You have to think, oh, I can do that. At what age did you think, oh, I see that person on TV, I think I can do that?
Well, you know, it was funny. I was my specialty in the Air Force, interestingly, was intercontinental ballistic missiles. And so I was actually one of the first group of Air Force personnel to train on the operation of our first successful rocket that we had, which was the Atlas, the SM-65D. When I got out of the Air Force, I didn't have much opportunity for in the civilian world for intercontinental ballistic missiles. There wasn't much of a career choice right there in civilian life. So, but a brand new television station had gone on the air in Biloxi, and that's the base. I was at Keesler Air Force Base in Biloxi, Mississippi, and WLOX of Biloxi got on the air while I was stationed there. So, I had some experience with educational television, teaching on the base. I was tapped for instructor duty after I went through the training. So I had some knowledge of how television worked and a lot of knowledge about how things electronic worked. So I knocked on their door and asked them if I could be useful. And I ended up running the on-air operations of that station and had to put together a news department to keep the license. So
wait, how old were you? You're running the station?
Early 20s. Yeah. Well, this was a shoestring operation in the basement of a hotel in Biloxi, Mississippi, Channel 13, an ABC affiliate, back when it was known as Almost Broadcasting.
Right.
But, in any event, I had to put together this this three-man news department just to have something to prove to the FCC that we were serving the community, so we could keep our license. Biloxi at the time was known as the Redneck Riviera. It was thoroughly corrupt. The state was a dry state in the heart of the Bible Belt, and you could, if you wanted to get a bottle of Jim Beam Sunday morning, you could send your 12-year-old down to the liquor store to buy it for you there in Biloxi, Mississippi. There were open casinos in Biloxi, Mississippi. There were strip joints. It was just bedlam down there. Because Mississippi had no statewide law enforcement authority, they had the county sheriff was the supreme authority in Mississippi at the time. And the county sheriff in that coastal county, Harrison, was notoriously corrupt. And the sheriffs would all retire on the back bay in fancy houses and It was an elective office, so there was an awful lot of money spent on running for office because it was quite profitable there. So that when we went into the news business, suddenly I was operating in what we would have called in the Air Force a target-rich environment. There was all kinds of mischief going on. So it wasn't very hard to get kind of hooked on that very quickly. It got very exciting very fast in Biloxi. And that's when I decided that of all the things I could do with this little television station, news was by far the most exciting. And so thus the bug bit and I was off and running.
Did you have mentors, or if you're so young and you're sort of running things, how did you learn how to do what you were doing?
Well, I watched Peter Jennings. He was not much older than I was, and he was anchoring ABC's evening newscast. So I watched him out of New York. I saw how he did it. I watched how the network reporters reported. Ultimately, Walter Cronkite became my touchstone, watching him. And he, at the time, was the most trusted man in America, you might remember. But watching, that's one of the benefits of television. You can have a mentor who doesn't know he's your mentor or she's your mentor. But in any event, I studied them, and I began to polish my writing skills and figure out how to use the medium. That was the key, was using this wonderful symphony of sound and picture and words to blend them into a story that has profound impact. That's once you learn to be able to use those three elements to make a story come to life, then I think you're well on your way to becoming a successful broadcast journalist.
And I was just to say, I think nowadays we've lost some of that, but we can talk about that later. How beautifully crafted a good TV news story is. It's like a piece of music. It has a beginning, a way to draw people in. There's a rhythm to it. And you've always captured that beautifully. If we can pause for a moment and look at an anniversary celebration about you and your work, if that's okay. Chuck is very modest. I'm not sure he even wants to see this, but we want to see it. So now roll the videotape.
Good evening, I'm Chuck Scarborough. This is News Center 4.
March 1974. Chuck came to News Center 4, as it was called then, to solo anchor the 5 o'clock newscast. He was already an accomplished journalist with success in Boston and Mississippi. It wasn't long before he moved to helm the 6 and 11 o'clock news programs.
Bellevue Hospital reports it has no power.
Even anchoring from the newsroom during the blackout of 1977, when there was no power to broadcast from our studios.
And it's going to be swung into place and put on board.
Chuck was never one to just linger behind the anchor desk. He was quick to take on field assignments here and around the world.
Here on the ground, the recovery
Vietnam,
through thick jungle.
South America.
This is the wine country in central Chile.
The Philippines.
She says, Uncle Al used to sing that song.
The last time I did this, the plane was a lot older and I was a lot younger.
An Air Force veteran and licensed pilot, Chuck nimbly took our viewers to the sky. In the 70s, he was one of the few journalists on board the inaugural flight of the Concorde.
And Mach 1, we have just broken the speed of sound, and quite honestly, it feels no different at all to me than when we were subsonic.
The Challenger explosion.
Look, right in this area, you're going to see a little bit of extra fire here.
We don't know exactly how many there are missing right now.
His dedication, expertise, and presence bringing calm during some of the Tri-State's most tragic events. March 2014 in East Harlem, capturing firsthand the events.
The access road to that school has been very, very quiet.
December 2012, the unthinkable massacre at a Connecticut elementary school.
Look at the second building!
And of course, 9/11.
That moment, my blood ran cold. I knew immediately that we were under attack, that my city was under attack, the nation was under attack. Something awful was truly unfolding.
He guided us through the tragedies, of course, but didn't shy away from the lighter moments.
Would you like to do the radar for me while you're here? Sure, go ahead. Put the radar on.
In his 45 years at 30 Rock, Chuck reached many heights. 36 local Emmys, inductee into the Giants of Broadcasting.
Tonight I gain a partner on the late edition of News Center 4.
And his record 32-year run with co-anchor Sue Simmons. He even managed to find time to write 3 novels.
Just fundamentally honored that I've been able to be here in New York and been able to bring to the citizens of this city and the surrounding area, and also on occasion to the country, news about the world in which we live that they need to make intelligent decisions in their lives, and to do what the founders envisioned when they created the First Amendment, to use the free press to keep the citizenry informed so that the democracy functions as it's designed to. And that's been an extraordinary honor. I've been here only because the viewers have let me.
How tough is it for you to watch that, Chuck? What are your thoughts as you watch that anniversary clip?
It was interesting. I'm tempted to say kind of a flip remark here. I enjoyed it thoroughly, but it is sobering, frankly, to look back at all of that time and to look at the progression through the years and the stories, some of which were sitting parked in the back of my memory, not exactly in the forefront, but some of those stories that I'd done over the years. It was a very interesting trip down memory lane, and I'm grateful to you, MAGEE, for doing that.
Well, I want to add that we all, us reporters, we're always looking to you. You were the most unflappable at times of crisis. Particularly, we used to have so many airplane crashes, it seems. We don't have those in the same number, thank God, anymore. But you, with your knowledge of planes and your ability to be calm and to ad infinitum, you could just, you didn't need a script. And so many, I can look at my past life on TV so many times where I was flappable and you are unflappable. You're always the voice of calm, which is such an important quality in an anchor, particularly on something as, catastrophic as 9/11. You want someone who really feels like family, someone you've been watching every night. And when the worst things happen, you want to feel that person is in charge. So, there hasn't been anyone in TV news in New York City like you for that.
Well,
So that's just
9/11 was the one story that stands well above everything else. We all of us in this room right now, everybody watching, has indelibly printed in their brains what happened on 9/11, where they were, and what happened, and the events that unfolded. I was on television talking about it. As soon as I could get there, after the first plane hit, I got to the anchor desk and began covering that story. Because of all of the things I had done over the years, all the stories I'd covered, many of which involved building collapses, many of which involved stories that sort of dovetailed into what was happening on 9/11, certainly terror attacks, and done all of those. I was able to bring some early analysis to what was going on. I understood what happens to structural steel when it's heated, and could explain why the buildings collapsed as they did at various intervals after the attack. If you go around, if you see buildings being built now, you'll see when the steel superstructure goes up, you'll see something that looks like oatmeal sprayed on the structure. That's insulation. It's insulation because steel is an excellent construction material until you heat it, and it loses its tensile strength when it gets heated. So you've got to insulate the steel in a building. So if you have a fire in one of those skyscrapers, you have time to get everybody out and hopefully the fire put out before the steel is weakened to the extent that it collapses. There wasn't that time at the World Trade Center. The impact of the planes probably stripped much of the insulation away where they hit, and the ferocious fire from the jet fuel heated the steel. So at some point, the sheer weight above the point of impact caused the buildings to collapse. And in fact, the South Tower collapsed first, and it was the second one hit. It collapsed first because the plane hit lower. There was more weight above the point of collapse. So to be able to talk about the scope of the tragedy and begin to pull all the pieces together live like that, but to do it with some at least elementary base of knowledge about what we were looking at on our TV screens, what everybody was so horrified by, I think was certainly helpful for me, because I was I was watching my city being attacked, my country being attacked. It was an extremely stressful day for all of us. But because I had to get to work, that I had to try to explain to my audience out there what was going on, it was a bit of a reprieve for me.
A reprieve in that you didn't have to, you had to be strong for everyone else rather than think about the enormity of it.
Yeah, I had a job to do, and nothing at all like the first responders out there, but my job was to try to make sense of this and to try to illuminate it, to try to get the facts as rapidly as I could and get them out in a sensible way, to put the story together. And I have to say the story came together very rapidly. The organization behind the attacks was revealed fairly quickly by our intelligence services. But we didn't know at the time whether we had 3,000 dead or 30,000. We didn't know how many people had gotten out of the buildings before they collapsed. And we didn't know what the extent of the attacks was going to be. We didn't know if this was the beginning of a series of attacks in the country. We didn't know how many foreign agents were inside our borders or inside our city. So there was an awful lot to keep me busy. And I think I was maybe more fortunate than people sitting at home, wondering, horrified, especially those who had not heard from relatives who were lost on 9/11 and were waiting desperately to hear from them.
Right.
What I didn't know was that the desk thought my brother had been killed. My brother was a cameraman at NBC. And he was dispatched. He happened to be in that morning. He was dispatched very early on after the first plane hit. And he set up the first camera position down there. He was the one who shot the towers collapsing. But he was when the towers came down, he was caught in both collapses. But we lost all communication when they collapsed. So I was on the air. I was in the studio, and the assignment desk was trying to reach our crew, my brother and our reporter, Rob Morrison, with no luck. And they were afraid that they had been killed. So there was a discussion I found out later in the newsroom, do we tell Chuck or don't we? And they decided to wait. I'm grateful they did, and I'm grateful that my brother survived it. He's retired and alive and playing music in the mountains of Colorado right now. But had they told me early on, I don't know if I would have been able to continue what I had to do. I doubt that I would have been if they thought he might have been among the casualties.
Wow, I never knew that story. I mean, I knew Jeff was down there. Jeff Scarborough, a wonderful cameraman. I loved working with him. I was at NBC from the mid 80s to the mid 90s, and Jeff, he loved his music almost, or maybe more than photography. So I'm happy to hear that he's off making music and where is he? He's in Colorado, is he?
It's outside of Denver.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. But what a poignant, I had no idea that they had lost communication. And that sounds like a novel. You don't feel like writing about that? Let's talk a little bit, and then we'll go back to the 20th anniversary of 9/11. But how did you ever have time in your career to write 3 novels?
Well, it was, I was a bit of a workaholic. I've learned to temper that. I've worked 4 days a week now. I was, when I was, I worked my way through college, working nights and taking a heavy course load of 21 hours a quarter, and I'd race out to the TV station in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, and jump into a suit, race out there, and you anchor the news or cover a story on the evening shift, and get back home at as such as it was back at 11 o'clock, 11:30 at night, and get up the next morning, go to class. So it was something that I could wedge into what free time I had, often at the expense of family, but I got kind of carried away with my writing, and I remember one time I had created a character for my first book who was a actually my second book, for the kind of evil characters. Anyway, he was an operative who had done through dastardly things through the book, and in the early going, I had a murder just as an opening, just a random murder as an opening scene in the book, and it didn't occur to me till I was probably 15 chapters into the book that the killer in that first scene was the character I had created, who had done a lot of evil things in the book. So I jumped up from the breakfast table and said, "Crawford did it." And I left the family and ran to my typewriter to write the thought down that I could close the loop on that first murder as well as everything else. So,
how did you possibly structure your day to have the time to write and also the time to anchor?
well, I was working basically 3 to midnight, and that gave me post midnight hours, which I often used, and it gave me mornings that I could sit down at the typewriter and fiddle around with this concept that I had come up with that drove me into doing something beyond. I had written a couple of magazine articles in addition to TV news before I finally decided to tackle a book, and I got carried away with the idea that popped into my head for a novel, and I decided to tackle it, and I let it just lead me through to the conclusion.
It's so magical that the characters all of a sudden, they take on a life of their own, and they're telling you who they are.
Yeah.
How does that affect home life? How do you have time to pay attention to everything else going on?
Well, I think it is not very healthy for home life if you're working all the time. I think you need to pay attention. There has to be a work-life balance, and it took me a long time to find that balance. In fact, my wife thought that I'm still seeking it, but
is there a novel in you right now that's bursting to come out?
I don't think so. Not right now. What I discovered in these various excursions was the work reward ratio was somewhat limited. So, none of them became a bestseller. One, though, did become a CBS miniseries. Interestingly, that was that
must have been an interesting process. How did you like the miniseries? Was it faithful to your book? Did you like the process?
Yeah, it was okay. It took them a long time to do it. Hallmark Entertainment bought the rights to Aftershock, and it took them a long time before they could have the ability to destroy New York City in an earthquake electronically, to do it at a reasonable expense. So when they finally launched the series and sold it to CBS, it was many years after the book had been written. But they did a reasonably good job. They necessarily had to compress things, but they did a good job. And it was on in prime time during a ratings sweep. And back in those days, McGee, you remember how fevered we were during rating sweeps?
Yeah.
2 kinds of multi-part special pieces to try to boost the audience during the ratings sweep that would determine our revenue for the next 3 months as a station.
My favorite, do you remember Jerry Nachman came up is God punishing us, when there had been a series of
strangest assignments.
when there was a series of hurricanes and typhoons, that we had a sweep series, is God punishing us? I mean, we would do anything. When I was expecting my first child, we did a series on me having a baby. That was 1987. Whatever we thought might pull in a little bit of the audience, which is what I find so interesting about TV news over the years. It's changed so much. How do you see the changes now? The world you walk into when you go to 30 Rock, how different is that from what you saw in 1974?
Probably the most significant are just the technological changes. The machinery we have now, the equipment we have now to cover news is so different than when I first started. We were using 16 millimeter color reversal film, frankly, black and white film initially in that first station I had, but you'd have to shoot the film and get it back to the station, get it in a processor, and the editing was very tactile. You actually popped the film with your fingers and hung it in the bucket and glued the various scenes together and hope that the splice joints held during the broadcast, which occasionally they didn't. The film would break and it was back to the anchors. So yeah, that the ability to communicate rapidly, to go live from almost anywhere on the planet on short notice, to edit digitally, non-linearly, those are such huge advances that what the digital age brought to us, and the ability to pack more information with more impact into shorter periods of time changed. The principles haven't changed, I don't think. What's changed peripherally is that we've have 24/7 news on a number of channels on cable, and we also have a heck of a lot of opinion on. And that wasn't part of the game back early on. The rule was that you did not ever betray what your worldview was. You maintained objectivity as best you could, balance as best you could, and if the audience could never guess what your own personal worldview was, then you were doing your job properly. That's not necessarily the standard for a significant part of the business now. There's still a lot of us who still cling to that, but not necessarily the standard anymore.
Nothing drives me more crazy when I'm out in the field now and I'm covering a fire or a murder and someone walks by and says fake news. I go, wait a minute. And, I engage, and I should just let it go. But I said, I'm just covering a fire. There's no agenda here other than to give the information. I always viewed it as such a high calling. We are truth tellers. We sometimes make mistakes, but our goal is to tell the truth, the unvarnished truth. This is what happened. These are the facts, man. There aren't alternative facts. But anyway, it's such a complicated time now to be a journalist. Don't you feel?
Oh, it is. Yes, it is. Because yes, we all get kind of wrapped into the same little bucket, and depending on which side of the aisle you're on, what your worldview is, you can retreat now. If you don't have to watch my newscast, you can, if you are conservative, you can watch Fox News, and you don't have to bother watching me. Or if you are liberal, you can watch MSNBC. You don't have to watch us. But I don't know that that's all that healthy. I think it's important. I do a lot of dial spinning. I watch everybody, because I think it's important to have a broader view of the world and not just retreat into your own little thought silo with like-minded people and not hear what other people are thinking and saying. So I do despair a bit about that, but there are a significant number of us who still cling to the notion that we ought to be fair and balanced and make sure we get both sides of the story on, and not let people know how we feel.
Yes, I think it's very important to do. And I always say I'm still in this because I still haven't gotten it right. What I love about TV news and journalism is you're always learning. You're always learning how to do it better. And, every day I would go home and think, oh, I could have written that story better. I could have created that story. I could have told that story better. And that's what keeps me working. Certainly not the, at least in my case, the small paycheck. You just, you have to really have a passion for the job. And what I try to, and I'm sure you're dealing with it too, I work with such young people now. I was covering the 9/11 21st anniversary a couple of Sundays ago. And I usually tell my 9/11 story, which I won't tell because I wasn't working. But, I turned to the cameraman and before I said, "Where were you?" I realized he was 2 years old on 9/11. So he does not have a memory. And it's important for us older people to share our memories and to talk about the poignancy of that day, which leads me to what I want to now introduce, but you could introduce it better. Just a beautiful story that you did on the 20th anniversary. Tell us about this story we're about to see on video.
Yeah, this is, we did something on the 20th anniversary at NBC that I think it is broadcast journalism at its absolute finest. We had this idea of going down to the parapet wall. How many of you watching now have actually been down to Ground Zero? You put up your hands? I'm just curious. Okay. I've been there any number of times on the anniversary, certainly, but it is a very moving place. When you walk around the footprints of the two towers and you look at that parapet wall with all the names etched into the brass around it, it is very, very moving. We decided that we would do a series called Beyond the Name, and we go down and just pick names, people who had not had anything told about them, their stories, their family stories in the 20 years, but just pick people. And most of our reporters picked random people, random names. I had one that I could not pick. It was a family friend, a friend of my children. They'd grown up together, played together. She'd been in our house many, many times. And so her name was Catherine Fairfax McRae. She was killed on 9/11. She was known to everybody who knew her and loved her as Cat McRae. So I decided I would do Cat's story. And I think this is an opportunity for our viewers here to see the story, and also to talk about what it takes to do just a single TV news story. This was the story I did, if you want, ready for the video, on the 20th anniversary a year ago of Cat McRae.
She was 23, beginning the next chapter in a life already filled with accomplishment. By all accounts, Cat was a superb student, athlete, and friend. Editor of her high school newspaper, team co-captain in 3 sports, Princeton honors graduate. She'd just begun a new job with Fred Alger Management at One World Trade Center. In a single moment of unspeakable cruelty and horror, Cat was gone. And a family of 4 became a family of 3, clinging to their memories and struggling with their loss, even at a distance of 20 years.
The shock of it, I mean, the horror of what happened took years for me to accept.
You raised her as well as any parents could. You protected her from everything, all harm, but you could not protect her from an ideology that celebrated the murder of innocence, that glorified it.
And we think about that a lot. I mean, my friends would have said, "Oh, you're so overly protective." And there she was, murdered in downtown Manhattan, not on a trip on some Botswana river or something. It was right there in our backyard.
Here we are, 20 years later, dealing with terrorists in exactly the same country. We're right back where we started.
For Cat's father, grief is equal parts loss and anger. Anger that the government didn't stop the attack. Anger that files on Saudi Arabia's potential involvement in the plot are still being kept secret.
It's frankly just repulsive. And to continue to let this ideology exist in the world.
You know, there's not been a chapter of my life that I have gone through that I haven't thought that I'm doing it and she didn't get to do it.
Annie McRae was 19 when her big sister was killed. Married now with 3 boys. And memories so vivid, so indelible, it almost seems Cat is still right there.
I hear her voice. I do hear, like, everything I do think, you know, would my sister be proud of this? I feel her and who she is saying, "Annie, you really shouldn't do that. You really shouldn't say that," like being critical of her little sister. I think about her all the time, I would say, as I carry through my life and make sure that she would still approve.
Shortly after Cat was killed, the family established the Cat McRae Fund to honor her legacy of academic excellence.
The fund supports programs for inner city children from low-income communities.
There are now 2 Cat McRae libraries in city schools, and support for Harlem Academy, a place where Cat's mother finds purpose that helps ease her grief, teaching art history.
How did the artist make him look strong?
He looks strong because of the nails that he has in his body.
Through these kids, there was a connection to Cat for me. Cat had so many opportunities, Annie did. I want these children to have those same advantages.
And at home, there was always a door open to life while Cat was alive. Their pictures.
I have now lived longer without Kat than with her. But you look at the pictures and she's like right here. Kat and I are playing in a pile of leaves in the backyard. But we're just playing and we're wearing matching sweaters, which is quite sweet.
She's looking at a puppet show here on her 3rd birthday. Such concentration.
That was a birthday party on a boat.
This is our Christmas card with our dog, Charlie.
You can see how she had progressed from a beautiful young girl to a slightly older, but still extraordinarily beautiful.
We had a photographer come the summer of 1995 to take family pictures, and little did I know, I'm so glad we took them. Yeah.
This is at her 21st birthday.
She was a captivating child, and I would say she remained that way all her life.
It's just a flow of marvelous memories with Kat.
And, you know, when there are no more photos to take, you hang on desperately and dearly to the ones you have.
Such a beautifully put together story, so poignant. Take us through the process. How long does it take to shoot, to write, to edit?
Well, on that story, the first thing, the first was the decision to make to do the story. Then I had to contact the family and explain to them what I was doing, and explain and get their permission, obviously, but that always takes a little bit of effort to persuade somebody that this is a good idea, that I want to tell a story and this is going to be broadcast to the world. And so they oftentimes people were very reluctant to do that. In this case, I had an advantage because I knew the family, but it still took a little bit of discussion to discuss the kind of the parameters of what we were doing. But I also had to get them to agree to provide all the pictures, everything personal about Kat, to help me there. Videos also. That video you saw of Harlem Academy was from Harlem Academy. They helped me procure that because I wanted to show the mother in the classroom there. Then it was a 2-camera shoot, which is kind of rare. Normally we go out with a single camera to do news stories, and when you see a reverse shot of the reporter asking a question, that's shot after the interview, and is the reporter repeating a question he asked. In this case, I wanted 2 cameras because I had this. I knew I wanted to show a lot of pictures of Kat. I also knew I didn't want to do it in the usual way with a 1-camera shoot where I would have done the interview with the camera pointed at the subject, and then later we would have taken individual pictures of all the photographs. I wanted to actually see them. I thought instead of having a full screen of all of those photos, that it would be much more intimate and meaningful for the audience to actually show the family holding the photos and talking about them one at a time. So that meant a second camera behind them. The camera also could shoot me asking questions, but the point of the camera, that camera, was to be able to shoot the photos in real time as they were being picked up by the family. And so these are kind of the technical parameters. That was in Southampton where that was shot, so it was a couple of hours away from Manhattan, and 2 crews had to go out there. So it was a fairly big commitment in resources. But then crafting the story, I think there's an example in there, and I'd like some feedback actually from the audience on this, but to write a line that says, first of all, I didn't want to show in this story about this young woman the actual impact of the planes and the towers or any of the wreckage from 9/11 or the horrible moment. What I elected to do was just show that single shot of the towers into a slow fade to black, to illustrate the moment that Kat was killed. And I wrote a line that said in a single moment of unspeakable cruelty, a family of 4 became a family of 3. And that is, if you just read that on a page, that wouldn't be very powerful. That's not a very complicated sentence. But if you couple that visually with a photograph of the 4 people that dissolves through to 3, when I say those words, I think that becomes exceedingly powerful. That's a moment where I think you really, as a viewer, can feel the loss that family felt just by being able to see that. And I throw that open to anybody who would like to comment and see if
Yeah.
agree with that.
I'll comment. If anybody else wants to, please write to me. I agree. I thought it was very powerful. It's not schmaltzy, but it says something that's really important. And, we are, as New Yorkers, most of us, I would say, we're here on the day. It continues to resonate with the anniversary. I thought it was very good to do it the way you did it. So thank you. Jane, did you want to comment? I saw you. No, okay. All righty. So yeah, anyway, I don't see any other comments at the moment. Rosie wrote to me. She's a board member and she says she agrees. So thank you.
I appreciate that. And MAGEE, the decision to have the family to shoot the pictures the way I did, what'd you think about that?
Oh, I thought it was beautiful. To have a 2-camera shoot is such a luxury, and so wonderful because it's so much more honest.
Mm-hmm.
I still go back to my favorite movie about TV news, Broadcast News, which talks about the 2-camera shoot and how, you can fake it in a question, you can fake a tear or whatever.
Yeah.
What really struck me about the whole piece is the poignancy and the looking forward. It didn't dwell on the tragedy, but what each family member has taken and moved with. I loved that the mother is teaching and that's helping her. And I love that the daughter, the sister, was more emotional than her parents. I mean, and I'm sure they all are dealing with their grief at all times, but for her to go through life thinking about her older sister just really struck me. So, and, it had the right, and we, sometimes don't get it right. Sometimes a story is just too sad, but this was sad and poignant and at the same time uplifting, because through tragedy, the mother is teaching and their foundations, and they're helping other people. It just was the right balance of what an incredible loss of a beautiful, smart, hardworking young woman, and the aftermath and how a family deals with it. It's why I continue doing TV news, because, there's always a way to do it better. Although that story may just be the perfect way. I hope you got an Emmy for that.
I don't know. I don't think so. There was another story we did in that same series of Beyond the Name that was truly remarkable, because it was a story about a firefighter whose picture was snapped. He died, but his picture was snapped when he was very harried looking in rescue operations, and he had saved the woman. And there was a daily news photographer had snapped this picture of him, I think, and the woman, as I recall correctly, at the moment he was bringing her out of the building or whatever it was. And the family of that firefighter had wondered for 20 years what became of that woman. And our reporter, and then we have a good investigative team at NBC, went to work, and we tracked her down. I think she was in Hong Kong or somewhere. But we tracked her down, and we had an on-camera sort of reunion between I believe it was the widow of the firefighter and the woman he had saved. And the Daily News photographer was retired and with a bunch of goats up in Massachusetts, and our reporter went up there to talk to him about taking the photograph, and it had wonderful elements in it, and had this moment of reunion that was quite powerful, of the family getting finally to meet this woman. And
TV news at its best, I think.
That's what. Look, we can do really good stuff when you blend those elements that I mentioned very early on. When you get the words and the pictures and the sound in the right proportions, and put them together to tell a story. There's nothing more powerful. I love good writing. I think writing is exceedingly powerful too. There are fabulous authors who can spin wonderful tales and craft brilliant sentences. but there is a different texture to what we do in television news simply because we have these other elements to mix in, and we are writing for the ear, not the eye. So sometimes the simple sentence is to the ear is much more powerful than some compound or complex sentence.
Yes, I consider myself really lucky to have worked at Channel 4 during what I consider really the heyday of local TV news.
Yeah.
I mean, we had, and I was really young at the time. I'm so not young now, but if in 1986, when I arrived there until 1986, it was 1996, it was just the pinnacle of really good. We had Mike Taibbi, we just had John Miller, we had great Tony Guida, Ralph Penza, all these people, of course, Gabe Pressman. We had such great reporters and writers and cameramen who were given time. I look back and think, wow, how lucky I was to be in that newsroom at that time, because it was really, you could be given a few days off to go investigate a story. Now that doesn't happen in TV news, although if it does happen anywhere in the city, I think it's at Channel 4 with their investigative unit. So yeah, I think we Channel 4 is still the leader in many ways of, really good journalism.
Yeah, we do. I'm very proud of them. They do a terrific job. And yeah, I mean, we used to, we aren't as profligate as we were back then. We don't, but we do, we dispatch people. We dispatched two of our team over to London for the Queen's funeral. And we dispatch people around the world now, but not like we used to. I used to, for heaven's sakes, I persuaded them to let me go to somewhere, probably in the 80s sometime, I don't know, or 90s, to go to Chile to do a story on Chilean Social Security for a week.
Could you imagine?
That sounds like the dullest possible story on the planet, doesn't it? Chilean Social Security, but it turned out to be pretty interesting. I won't bore you with it's much more interesting if you watch it on television than if I tell you about it. But the point here is that, yeah, I used to be able to go anywhere on the face of the earth where a story tickled my fancy.
Right. Could you imagine asking a boss now, could you send me to Chile to do something on Social Security? No. Sadly, too often it's driven by, how many of our viewers are worried about Chilean Social Security?
Yeah.
But let's talk a little about your TV wife, who I miss so much on TV. What was it like working with Sue Simmons all those years?
It was fabulous and interesting and suspenseful. Sue never had an unspoken thought, so she was not one to research. So, but she was she walked. Maggie, she was a terrific co-anchor. I adore her. I'm still in touch with her. She retired a number of years ago. Just turned 80. We celebrated her 80th birthday. But over the years, Sue would walk very close to the edge of impropriety on air a lot. I'll share one story, and I know you have a little hand grenade you want to drop on this thing. But once there was a story that was, I wasn't sitting next to her at the time. It was on the 5 o'clock program, and I forget who the hapless co-anchor was sitting with Sue. But they had a story after the weather, which is usually a soft spot of the newscast, right after weather, and it was a baby whale had washed ashore on Long Island, sick, and it was being tended to by marine specialists, being nursed back to health. And so it was a little voiceover. It's kind of interesting visually, the whale and the people trying to help the whale, and it was a little 30-second voiceover. And when Sue finished the voiceover, her co-anchor said, Sue, you didn't seem to be all that sympathetic about the whale. And Sue said, oh, I am. And if he gets well, I'll kiss his little blowhole. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, but it's a little bit edgy, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely. That's why we all loved Sue so much. She was so entertaining. You never knew what she would really, what could come next. Let's talk about the famous time. What was the year? Maybe 2008, where Shall we go to the clip first, where I hope it doesn't offend anyone? We're going to use the F word from a clip of Sue Simmons. Let's
Viewer
roll
discretion advised.
Yes, viewer discretion. If it offends you, put on mute.
At 11, paying more at the grocer, but getting less will tell you how to get the most. The fuck are you doing? We need to acknowledge an unfortunate mistake that I made, and one of the teases we bring to you before this program. While we were live, just after 10 o'clock, I said a word that many people find offensive. I'm truly sorry. It was a mistake on my part, and I sincerely apologize.
Okay.
So now from Chuck, what was happening? How did that come about?
That was now, yes, that was Sue at her most playful. We would do this. That was a tease for the news that we usually ran around 10:30 every night for the 11 o'clock news. And we would, back in the day, we would go downstairs and we would customarily rehearse it for time before we actually had to do it live. It was always live. And I always resented being pulled out of the newsroom and sent to the studio to do that thing, because I was working on the broadcast and didn't like getting torn away, but I had a computer at the desk. So I would sit down there till we went live. We do the rehearsal. I'd sit there and I'd work on the script in my computer at the anchor desk. So I was always up till the point of cue distracted. We had a new stage manager in the studio, a young woman who was unaccustomed to my powers of concentration when I'm working, and Sue's interesting personality. So anyway, this was somehow we didn't do the rehearsal that night, and Sue assumed this was a rehearsal when she got this faint cue. I didn't hear anything. So I'm working away, and Sue is I hear Sue reading the copy, and I'm thinking she's just rehearsing. And when I didn't pick up my part, she turned to me thinking it was the rehearsal, and you know, I'm not going to repeat it, but that's what the what the F are you doing came, just to be playful. At which point this poor young trainee who was our stage manager said, "We're live," and they faded away to black, and Sue popped on later with an apology. So during the broadcast, but it was just this sort of combination of errors that Sue finally. This is after, gosh, I mean, this is probably Sue had been in the business for probably close to 30 or 40 years at that point, and she had walked up close to the line every day of those 30 or 40 years, and never had crossed over. And this she finally did. But it did not harm her career. There was a kind of an immediate outburst of complaints, and followed by a groundswell of sympathy from every other person in television news who could appreciate getting caught on a hot mic inadvertently doing something naughty, and sympathize with her. So it wasn't an instantaneous guillotine for her career. In fact, she signed an 18-month extension not long after that.
Right.
I think because the ratings went up.
The ratings went up, right? And you know, there was something always so infectious and honest and entertaining about Sue, because you just knew when she read a story how she was feeling about some stories. I would look, when you talked about mentoring and you would watch Peter Jennings, I would watch Sue Simmons when I was anchoring in Providence, Rhode Island, because I would naturally go watch a female, I don't know, rather than a male, or I should have been watching you probably. But I would watch her because she really, I always loved the way she read the news, because you could tell when something was really important and something was a throwaway. And there was always an honesty to the way she read it. And then her Live at 5 interviews, we all loved, because you never knew what was coming next. You know, there was an improvisatory, she just was herself on the air. And there aren't that many people totally like that. She also, you know, as we talk about how, you know, beautifully you craft that piece about 9/11 20 years later, that wasn't Sue's strength at all. I'm not sure I remember, you could correct me. Her taking that attention to detail in video. She was alive at 5-person. She was interested in arts and entertainment. And as you say, walking on the edge, seeing how far she could push the envelope. What could she get away with? And that made you two such a fabulous combination because your strengths were so different. And she very much needed you. And, you know, clearly in the aftermath, I'm not sure you needed her, but it was a nice balance.
No, it was. It was very nice. And there was always some tiny little element of trepidation because you never really knew what Sue was going to do. That kept you sharp and kept you kind of alert and tuned in. Yeah, I think it was a great team. We were together for 33 years, and it was a wonderful anchor team. I don't know there are that many anchor teams that have been together that long.
I think it's a record in New York City, right? You're breaking all these records. You're a record longest running anchor and then longest running anchor team. But Judy, should we turn it over to questions now? And is Rita Satz, the fabulous Rita?
Rita is with us. We'll call her on her. And well, Rita, if you're ready, let's see. And yeah, there are some questions. And let's see if we can get Rita to unmute. Okay. Rita, can you unmute? You have to unmute, Rita. You've done it before. To the lower. I know you're on an iPad. Let's see if you can do that. Okay, I'm going to ask a question in the meanwhile.
Oh, wait a minute.
Oh, you did it. Great. Okay, Rita, come on in. We know you're close friends, and we thank you so much for getting Chuck to be with us today. So go ahead.
Well,
please.
I am delighted to see Chuck again. Chuck, when I was thinking about talking to you, I thought about the word anchor. And we take that for granted now. We could have called you readers or supervisors, but that's what you really are, is an anchor that held us all down. I loved working with you. I was scared to death of you. But one of the things I wondered about was the important thing about being an anchor to me was when something went wrong. I really worried, what if my spot, and sometimes it didn't make air, or they put the wrong spot up or whatever. How did you cope so well with when things didn't go well?
You know, I don't know. I think the first thing you do when something is going haywire is explain that it's going haywire. And I think,
in other words, you were honest.
Yeah, I'd say that we seem to have lost that signal. We'll try to get that back for you, or we had a report plan for this slot, but it wasn't quite ready, so we're going to move on. You know, what just to kind of get your footing, to buy a little bit of time to if you happen to know what the story is about, then you can do a synopsis, and I've had to do that on a few occasions too, where in the absence of the story, if it fails, you can sort of just ad lib a brief synopsis of what the story is about and then try to get back to it later. In the hurly-burly of putting newscasts together, it's not always possible to read every script that every reporter has produced because they're not always there. They're not there, or they don't make the rundown in time for a reasonable read. But it's helpful to ground yourself in what's going to be on broadcast that night and have some working knowledge of all the stories that are going to be presented, so you can, even if you're not responsible for introducing them, so that you can.
I would say probably one of your biggest assets was quick thinking. If the story changed in the middle, if they broke in with breaking news, you have no preparation. Is there any way to prepare yourself for that kind of ability to jump in?
I don't know. I think that in that case, you know, we back before we had all these electronic gizmos that would spit out information for us, we had the wire room and human beings, and so when we were going on live to and the assignment desk, and we were going on live to cover something, for example, it was a TWA 93 that suddenly blew up and crashed off the coast of Long Island. And we went live. It happened at probably, I don't know, sometime in the middle of prime time. And we were on the air live with the fact that a 747 had gone down on its way to Paris. And it was right off the south shore of Long Island. So what happens at that point is we jump on the air to talk about the basic facts, and the newsroom is scrambling to get phoners with anybody they can who's a witness to. We're marshaling crews to get out to the scene, and people are thrusting notes in front of me with information. And in those days, where somebody on the assignment desk would dig up something and they talk to me about it. So you just start building on what you know and keep adding new facts as they come in, and then doing regular recaps because people are tuning in all the time, and you have to kind of go back and explain over and over again what they're looking at. On that particular night, we had actually the aforementioned John Miller went out the boat and actually reached the crash site. And we also had a helicopter. I remember we had a live shot from a helicopter heading out that way. And I do recall watching that, talking about there was a strange glow on the water and we could see at the distance. And as the helicopter got closer and closer, suddenly I realized what we were all looking at on our screens, and that's the people at home and me simultaneously realized it was fire, that there was burning jet fuel on the water, and which was a very chilling visual confirmation that that plane was lost. So that moment occurred live on television, and we also have occasionally gotten on those moments when we use a lot of phoners, getting people who have witnessed it or people who are involved in the rescue operations, or getting anybody we can on the air to talk, to fill time and try to add more facts to the story. You have to be cautious about getting crank calls or prank calls, and that did happen.
Did anybody field the calls, or you take them live? I can't remember.
Yeah, well, yes, they are not. There's not delay. They are on the air live, and in real time. So if somebody, it was actually during that particular story, there was somebody who called him saying he was a Coast Guard officer and information, and the assignment desk put him through, and we put him on the air, and it was back in the Baba Booey days of Howard Stern. Remember that?
Oh, yes.
Baba Booey.
Yeah.
This guy started talking, and I got suspicious quickly because what he was saying wasn't particularly profound or knowledgeable. And then he went into the Baba Booey, and so I cut him off right away and had an unkind word to say about him and apologized to the audience. There were people at home watching who had lost loved ones, and this was just
other questions in chat I wanted to make sure we got to. One of them from Joanne asks, was there ever a story that you refused for whatever reasons to report? And, for instance, passed on to another reporter on air?
Gosh, I don't know. I don't know there was ever a story I refused to report because of anything other than, I guess the closest I might have come was when Jerry Nachman came up with that assignment about, is God punishing us? Because we've been through a series of global calamities, and AIDS had just arrived on the scene. That was part of the God's punishment, and his explanation was, well, he keeps hearing people say God is punishing us, God is punishing us. So I at first it seemed to me to be a foolish proposition, this series of calamities, and that I didn't really want to be involved in, but I finally acquiesced and decided to try to make something interesting of it, and did a series of reports on that. Actually talked to some clergymen and talked to people in the street, and did a recap of all the various calamities, plus this new bug that had arrived on the scene that was threatening lives, the AIDS virus. So
yeah, we have another question from Lisa, who asks whether the voice you have now is your natural voice, like pre-news anchoring or news reporting, or did you have to work on it, develop it, create it? Yeah.
Well, actually, puberty handled that. My mother claims I had a very high squeaky voice as a child, and actually, I think in what must have been a signal that I was destined for a career in television news happened when I was 2 years old. My father was flying B-17 bombers in the European theater in the Second World War. It was 1945. And my mother had taken me, oddly, to the movie theater. The only visual news back then people were getting about the war was movie tone news in the movie theaters. Anybody here old enough to remember that? The movie tone. So she had taken me, and the movie tone news came up, and they had footage of a squadron of B-17s on this big screen. And I jumped up in my squeaky little voice, according to my mother, and said, "My daddy flies B-teens. My daddy flies B-teens." The entire movie theater burst into tears. Child, it was and so the ability to make massive numbers of people cry clearly. For television news. So yeah, no, the voice just sort of evolved, and I suppose I had to be a little more clever when I told you, I think earlier, that I was tapped for instructor duty when I was in the Air Force. So I ended up spending 2 years teaching, and which was an interesting exercise. I enjoyed it actually quite a bit, but it was teaching a subject that wasn't too applicable to civilian life. But there I was, and I had to speak to a classroom full of young men. So I had to speak clearly.
I have two other questions, and maybe there'll be more. We'll try to squeeze in. Bernie Starr, who's another board member, asks, were you ever frustrated that you couldn't give more of your own views and reactions?
Oh, no, not at all. My own views and reactions are reserved for my family and friends. And, my frustration is when I see somebody who has inadvertently or advertently not maintained that objectivity. And when I see, and it happens, I know certainly, I don't think there is a reporter in the shop with an agenda, but sometimes someone will write something and not realize that it is betraying a certain point of view. And I like to catch those if I can.
So I have a question. You're not a native New Yorker. You've been here a long time and been an important factor in New York. What do you think about how New York is doing and its future? Are you optimistic? Are you worried? What can you tell us about you in New York, in your view?
I can tell you, I've been periodically worried about New York, and the worries have always evaporated. I was worried about New York when we went bankrupt, not long after I arrived. The city, there was an awful lot of talk about the city becoming irrelevant and people were moving out. There was, during the terrible period of rising crime in the late 70s, early 80s, when crime was a big issue. I was worried about New York and various financial calamities that occurred in 2008. Worried about New York, but inevitably we go through these these periods, 9/11, you know, we go through these periods where the city takes a major hit economically, and then 9/11 physically took a hit, but always in each instance it's come back. We're going through another difficult period right now. We're going through a difficult period for a lot of reasons, but generally speaking, I mean, I think the history is clear that we correct course. Eventually we correct course and we rebuild and we come back stronger than ever. So I am hopeful about the future of New York. I think we do have some problems we've got to overcome, but history suggests we will.
Chuck, do you feel that news the way we're seeing it now on television is going to continue, though? Young people seem to be not turning to television. They're turning to their phones. Do you see a sliding away, or?
Yes, I do. I see, I think I know there will always be a market for reliable, interesting information about the world, because we can't make good decisions about our lives if we don't know what's really going on, not just what's going on in our little lane of interest, but we need to know what's happening in the world if we're going to be responsible citizens in a democracy. So I think all of us, from the most basic decisions of where we live and where we invest and all these things, we all need to have good, reliable information. So I think the task that we have at NBC and that every other organization has is to maintain the brand, be known as a place you can trust, and that you'll get reliable, timely, interesting information from that source. How it's distributed is evolving. I don't know what the future of the scheduled appointment newscast is, where you as a viewer have to show up at 6 o'clock to watch me, or show up at 6:30 to watch Lester. I don't know that has much endurance, or that has the lifespan of that particular iteration is going to continue on for the next several decades. I'm not sure. I do know that we've seen the share of the audience steadily decline. I think certainly in times of great distress, it becomes very important. But in those cases, we just throw away the schedule and we go wall-to-wall coverage, like the 24-hour services, when we have huge stories like 9/11 or some terror.
We're going to take advantage of your kindness and have one last question. By the way, I want to mention, you mentioned stage manager. We actually have a stage manager doing a class this afternoon. I want to remind everybody appropriately. So Bernie Starr asks, and I promise last question, how do you feel about the lack of coverage of international news? Cable gives us 24 hours of Donald Trump. I will avoid using the F word myself when I say that. Okay.
Well, yeah, I think that we have always been criticized about being somewhat parochial in the United States. We have these two oceans that have always sort of separated us from the rest of the world. So we've been more preoccupied, done a lot more navel gazing journalistically than perhaps other countries do. I think that's changing, but we certainly at our peril don't watch what's happening and learn what's happening in the rest of the world, because we are so interconnected. Everything that happens globally affects us. We're not in a vacuum here anymore. So when Russia decides to invade Ukraine, we end up paying more at the gas pump. So I think that the criticism is fair, that we probably need to pay more attention to what's going on in the rest of the world, and not just for the big events, not just for the big calamities that happen, or wars or disasters or things like that, but just so we can understand what other countries are doing.
Terrific. Well, I want to thank both Chuck and MAGEE. It's been a wonderful session, enlightening, enjoyable, terrific. And David, if you can quickly put up we have a picture of both Chuck and Rita. Let's see.
Well, I have to, if I may say this.
Whoops. Can you see? They've circled them. So that's Chuck on the left and
Yeah.
Rita in the middle there.
And you see Betty Furness, Rita?
Yes, I do.
Yeah. Oh, yep.
Over on the side.
Yep. Over on the right-hand side. They were quite a team, Rita and Betty.
Yeah.
And I don't know, Rita, I don't want to stretch this too far, but were you with Betty when she almost single-handedly killed the Audi brand? Audi car brand?
I couldn't hear you, Chuck.
David, can you take off the picture? I think it's causing audio problems. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. No,
Can you repeat the question, Chuck?
yes. Were you working with Betty Furness when she almost sank Audi automobiles?
Yes. I was with Betty almost from the very beginning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The story on runaway acceleration on an Audi.
On Audis, that's right. It went right into a swimming pool.
Yeah, exactly. That was it. It was an Audi, the four-wheel
I
drive.
have to tell you, that wasn't Betty. That was me. I did that.
Oh, you did the Audi story. I thought you did it with Betty.
I did do it with Betty, but Betty wasn't always there, as you know.
Yes, I know. You were the
Always
producer.
that field producer was doing it.
Well, when I tell the story now, it's going to be that you almost killed Audi.
That's true.
The woman claimed the accelerator stuck, and she went right through her garage, and the car ended up in the bottom of the pool.
It was somebody else's garage. Actually, we were interviewing this couple,
yeah,
and showing how unintended acceleration happened, that this car would start, and it did. It took off, went through their garage and into their swimming pool. And I think that the myth then arose that it was Betty's swimming pool. She didn't have a swimming pool. We had a few myths in those days. Not on purpose. These were things that the audience would interpret.
Yeah. Well, you always did a fabulous job, Rita, and I'm honored to be on with the poet laureate of the group here.
And we want to thank all of our speakers today, Chuck, MAGEE, and Rita, for a fabulous job, to quote you. So can we all please thank you? It's been wonderful. And keep on trucking.
Thank you. Thank you.